The night air was thick with the scent of rain on asphalt. The alley was dark, the streetlights barely cutting through the mist that rolled in from the bay. A man walked alone, his broad shoulders hunched slightly against the chill. Then came the voices. "Hey, old man." The man didn't stop walking. He had heard that tone before, the bravado of young men looking for trouble. A group of teenagers, 4, maybe 5, stepped out from the shadows. Their faces were half hidden under hoodies, their sneakers scuffing the ground as they closed in. One of them, a tall boy with a smirk that reeked of arrogance, blocked the man's path. "You lost?" the boy sneered. "This ain't your part of town, Pops." The man exhaled slowly, his fingers flexing at his sides. He wasn't lost. He had lived through battles far worse than this. One of the teens scoffed, stepping closer. "You ain't gonna answer. Maybe you need a lesson in respect." Another pulled a phone from his pocket. "Yo, we about to go viral," he chuckled. The man looked at them for the first time. His dark eyes, calm and unreadable, settled on each of their faces in turn. He could see it now, what they didn't know. What they couldn't know. And that ignorance. That was their biggest mistake. The leader of the group, the tall one with the smirk, cracked his knuckles. "What's the matter, old man? Cat got your tongue?" The man didn't flinch. He wasn't old, not really. His body was a fortress built through years of discipline, though his demeanor spoke of someone who had seen and endured more than these kids could imagine. "Walk away," he said, his voice low, steady. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. The boy with the phone chuckled. "Nah, I think you walk away. This ain't your street." Another teen, skinnier but mean-looking, stepped to the side, trying to flank him. "Maybe he's got some cash on him." The man sighed. They were making mistakes, rookie mistakes. Their stances were lazy, their weight uneven. They weren't fighters. They were kids who thought they were wolves but had no idea they had just stumbled into the den of a lion. But they wouldn't realize that until it was too late. The leader reached out, shoving him hard in the chest. "You deaf, man?" I said. Faster than any of them could react, the man's hand shot out. He caught the boy's wrist in a grip like iron. The smirk vanished, replaced by something close to panic. The boy struggled, but the man's hold was unbreakable. The others hesitated. Then, anger. "Yo, let him go." A fist came swinging from the side. The man ducked, twisted. In one fluid motion, he yanked the leader forward, sending him stumbling into his friend's punch. The crack of knuckles against a face echoed through the alley. The leader fell to the ground, groaning. The other teens froze. For the first time, they looked at the man, not as an easy target, but as something else. Something dangerous. And still, they didn't know. Still, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The tallest boy scrambled to his feet, wiping a trickle of blood from his mouth. His face twisted in rage. "You think you're tough, old man?" The man tilted his head slightly. "I don't think," he said. "I know." Another teen pulled a switchblade from his pocket, flicking it open with a practiced motion. "You just messed up, dude." The man's eyes darkened. They had no idea what they had just done. He lifted his hands slowly, palms up, as if surrendering. The one with the knife grinned, mistaking the movement for fear. Big mistake. The moment the teen lunged, the man moved. His foot shot out, striking the attacker's wrist with pinpoint accuracy. The knife clattered to the ground. A heartbeat later, the man's elbow connected with the boy's chest, sending him flying backward. The others barely had time to react before he turned on them, his movements precise, controlled. One kick sent another sprawling. A well-placed strike to the jaw left a third slumped against the wall. And then, just like that, it was over. Panting, the teens struggled to their feet, staring at him in shock. The man adjusted his jacket, barely winded. "I warned you." The leader, holding his bruised ribs, spat at the ground. Who the hell are you?" The man exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "I'm Mike Tyson." Silence. The realization hit them all at once, like a sledgehammer to the chest. Their eyes widened. The blood drained from their faces. Mike Tyson. The heavyweight champion. The living legend. The man who could knock out a full-grown fighter with a single punch. And they had just tried to jump him. One of the boys, one who hadn't even fought, just stood frozen, took a step back. "Yo, we didn't know, man. We didn't know." Tyson gave a slow nod. "That's the problem." The leader wiped his bleeding lip, his whole body trembling. This ain't fair, man. You a pro fighter." Tyson stared at him. "And you're a kid who thought it was okay to pick a fight with a stranger." No one spoke. "You see," Tyson continued, stepping forward, his presence alone enough to make them flinch, "I know guys who've spent their whole lives in places tougher than this. They fought because they had no choice. They fought because if they didn't, they wouldn't eat. But you?" He looked them over. "You think this is a game? You think respect comes from fear?" The boys shifted uncomfortably. "You're lucky," Tyson said. "Because if I was the man I used to be, you'd be in the hospital right now." The words hit harder than his fists. "But I ain't that man no more," he added. "So I'm giving you a choice." The teens swallowed hard. "You walk away from this and learn something," Tyson said. "Or you keep going down this path and find out what real pain feels like." The leader's hands clenched, his face tight with frustration. But he wasn't stupid. "We good," he muttered. Tyson nodded. Without another word, the boys turned and took off down the alley, their bravado shattered. Tyson watched them go, shaking his head. He had seen their type before. Some would learn. Some wouldn't. But at least, tonight, he had stopped them from making an even worse mistake. He took a breath, adjusted his jacket, and walked away. Just another night. Just another fight. But this time, he didn't have to throw a single punch. Tyson had seen it happen too many times before. Violence was never isolated, it rippled outward, feeding on pride, humiliation, and misplaced anger. He had walked away from that alley expecting at least some of the kids to learn their lesson. But in a world built on image, where respect was often mistaken for fear, not all of them would let it go so easily. And now, just as he stepped into the glow of the streetlights, he heard it. "Yo, that was Mike Tyson." The words cut through the night air like a siren. Tyson kept walking, his expression unreadable. He had learned to ignore noise over the years. But this wasn't just noise. It was the sound of a moment turning into a movement, one he had no choice but to acknowledge. The voices behind him grew louder. "Nah, man, we gotta do something," one of the teens snapped, frustration thick in his tone. "He made y'all look weak." Tyson's jaw tightened. He had hoped that walking away would be the end of it. But he had been in too many fights, both in and out of the ring, to not recognize what was happening. Shame was an ugly thing, and these kids had just been humiliated in front of their peers. They weren't thinking about the lesson. They weren't even thinking about the pain in their ribs or the bruises forming on their jaws. They were thinking about what people would say. What the streets would say. Tyson took a slow breath. Then, just as expected, just as inevitable, another voice cut through the group. "I don't care who he is. You don't let some old man punk you out like that." Tyson stopped walking. He turned slightly, just enough to see them out of the corner of his eye. There were 4 new figures now, older, bigger, tougher looking than the first group. These weren't just kids acting tough. These were men who had spent their lives building reputations they weren't willing to lose. One of them, thick-built, scar over his left eyebrow, rolled up his sleeves, cracking his neck. "You don't just let some dude do that to you, man," Scarface growled. His voice was lower, heavier, edged with something that went beyond bravado. "I don't care if he was a champ back in the day. Ain't no one untouchable." One of the younger boys hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "Bro, it's Mike Tyson." Scarface scoffed. "So what? He ain't in the ring no more. He's just a washed-up boxer." Tyson exhaled through his nose. "They always think that." He turned fully now, facing them under the dim orange glow of the streetlight. He didn't speak. Didn't move. He just stood there. And in that silence, something shifted. The ones who had already fought him. They felt it first. They knew. They could see it in the way Tyson carried himself, the way he wasn't backing away, wasn't even concerned. But the newcomers? They still thought they had the upper hand. Scarface took a step forward, sizing Tyson up. "You got a lucky shot in on some kids, old man. That don't mean you can take me." Tyson tilted his head slightly, his face unreadable. "You should rethink this," he said. The voice was calm. Not threatening. Not posturing. Just, certain. Scarface grinned, mistaking it for weakness. "Man, you ain't scary. You just a name. Ain't been in a real fight in what, 20 years? Tyson didn't answer. Scarface smirked. "Yeah, that's what I thought." He cracked his knuckles, rolling his shoulders like a man who had already decided how this was going to go. Tyson had seen men like him before. In the ring. On the streets. In prison yards. They always thought the same thing, that strength came from looking strong. That intimidation came from words, from size, from the way they carried themselves. They didn't understand real power. Not yet. Scarface stepped in. "I bet you slow now. Bet you ain't got that power no mo." Tyson moved. It happened in an instant. One moment, Scarface was standing tall, grinning, speaking. The next, he was on the ground, gasping, his arms wrapped around his ribs like he was trying to keep his insides from spilling out. The others barely registered what had happened. Tyson hadn't swung wild. Hadn't thrown a haymaker or a flashy knockout punch. He had done something far more devastating, something only a fighter of his caliber could do. A perfectly placed body shot. Short. Precise. Delivered with just enough power to let the man know that if Tyson had wanted to, he could have ended him. Scarface lay curled up, wheezing, his mind struggling to catch up to the pain in his body. His face twisted in rage, but behind it, there was something else. Something Tyson recognized immediately. Fear. The air was thick with silence. The others didn't move. Didn't speak. Tyson straightened, exhaling slowly. Then he tilted his head, looking down at the man writhing on the pavement. "I told you," he said simply. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned his gaze to the rest of them. "Anyone else?" No one answered. No one even breathed. Scarface groaned, struggling to sit up, but his arms wouldn't let go of his ribs. His face was pale now, his forehead damp with sweat. He gritted his teeth, looking up at Tyson, and for the first time in his life, in his entire life, he was looking at a man he knew he couldn't beat. Not here. Not now. Not ever. Tyson adjusted his jacket and stepped over him. "Don't make me tell you again," he said. And just like that, he walked away. This time, no one followed. Not a single step. And as Tyson disappeared into the night, the whispers began again. But this time, they weren't about payback. This time, they were about something else entirely. Respect. The night was thick with tension. The air hung heavy, charged with something almost electric. The street was still, but in that stillness, danger brewed. Mike Tyson knew this feeling well. He had felt it in the moments before a knockout. In the seconds before an opponent realized, too late, that they had made a terrible mistake. And right now, as he walked away, he could feel their eyes on him. Watching. Calculating. Deciding. The younger boys were frozen, their world flipped upside down. Just minutes ago, they had thought they were untouchable. Now, they knew better. But the older ones? The ones who hadn't yet felt what Tyson could do. They still believed in their own myths. They still thought reputation, numbers, and aggression meant something. They still thought they had a choice. Scarface groaned from the pavement, cradling his ribs, struggling to sit up. His pride was shattered, but anger flickered in his eyes. His whole life, he had ruled over men weaker than him. His fists had always been enough. But tonight? Tonight, they weren't. And he couldn't accept that. "Yo, we ain't just gonna let this slide," one of the others snapped, his voice cutting through the night air like a blade. Tyson kept walking. His steps slow. Unhurried. He wasn't running. He wasn't afraid. And somehow, that made them angrier. Scarface finally found his voice, spitting the words through clenched teeth. "Someone, get him." For a moment, no one moved. They had seen the speed. The power. The precision. But Scarface was their leader. And in this world, loyalty outweighed logic. So, against all reason, against every instinct screaming at them to stop, they went after Tyson. The shift in the air. Tyson heard the shuffle of footsteps behind him. He had been in this exact moment before. He had heard it in the ring, the last desperate surge of a fighter who knew he was about to lose, swinging wildly, hoping to land a lucky shot. He had heard it in the streets, in prison, in back-alley brawls where men fought for more than victory, they fought for survival. And he knew what always came next. The mistake. One of the older men lunged, reaching for Tyson's shoulder. Big mistake. Tyson moved like liquid steel. He twisted, his body coiling and exploding in the same motion. His left hand shot out, catching the attacker's wrist in a grip so strong, so absolute, that the man's legs buckled. In a flash, Tyson yanked him forward, pivoted, and slammed his other fist, just a fraction of his true power, into the man's gut. The sound was sickening. Not the hollow thud of a punch in a boxing ring. This was real. A wet, visceral impact that stole the man's breath before he even realized what had happened. His body folded inward, his knees giving out as he collapsed to the pavement, gasping for air that wouldn't come. One down. The others hesitated. But it was too late. Tyson had already shifted. He was in his zone now, his mind clear, his body lightning. Another came in swinging. Sloppy. Desperate. Tyson ducked under the wild punch, stepping in close, too close. Before the man could react, Tyson delivered a brutal liver shot, short, compact, devastating. The man's entire body froze. His legs stopped working. His eyes went glassy. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then he crumpled, face first, into the pavement. Two down. The collapse of confidence. Scarface was still on the ground, watching in horror as his boys dropped one by one. This wasn't a fight. This was an education. Tyson turned, slow and deliberate. His dark eyes locked onto the remaining two, who stood stiffly, their hands balled into useless fists. They had started this night thinking they were predators. But now they understood the truth. "You still want this?" Tyson asked, his voice calm. The taller of the two, one with a shaved head and shaky hands, took a step back. The other one didn't move. But Tyson could see the battle in his mind. The war between pride and survival. Scarface groaned again, trying to push himself up. His lips curled into something that was supposed to be defiance. "Man, you, Tyson," he spat. "You think this makes you tough?" Tyson exhaled through his nose. "You don't get it," he said. And then, in a blur, he moved again. Not to fight. Not to attack. But to end it. Before Scarface could react, Tyson was there. Right in front of him. He didn't throw a punch. Didn't lift a finger. He just stood there. Close enough that Scarface could feel the weight of him. The reality of him. Tyson leaned in slightly. "You ever fight someone who likes it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Scarface's face twitched. What? Tyson's stare didn't waver. "You ever fight someone who was made for this?" Scarface swallowed hard. Tyson didn't blink. "You don't want this," he said simply. And in that moment, Scarface knew. He knew Tyson wasn't just a legend. Wasn't just some washed-up fighter. He was still that guy. The one who had destroyed men twice their size. The one who had ruined careers. The one who could end them without even breaking a sweat. And worst of all, he had held back. Scarface broke first. His eyes darted away, his shoulders sagging, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The other two hesitated only a second longer before turning and bolting down the street. Scarface stayed frozen for a moment, still trying to process what had just happened. Then, finally, slowly, he pushed himself to his feet and staggered away, not saying another word. Tyson watched them go. He sighed. Then he turned and walked into the night. This time, nobody followed. And just like that, the lesson was over. By morning, the world knew. At first, it was just whispers. Neighborhood talk. The kind of story that spread fast on the streets but usually stayed there. "You hear about what happened last night? Man, some fools tried to jump Mike Tyson." "Tried?" "Yeah. Tried. But then, someone uploaded the video. It wasn't long, only about 30 seconds. Shaky footage, clearly filmed from the shadows. The clip started right as the second guy hit the pavement, crumpling like a rag doll. The camera wobbled as someone whispered, "Oh, sh*." Asterisk in the background. Then, there was Tyson. Standing over them. Calm. Unshaken. And then came the words. "You ever fight someone who likes it?" The way he said it, so quiet, so certain, sent chills down everyone who watched. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. The video exploded. The internet eruption. By noon, Twitter was on fire. Mike Tyson just folded some street dudes like lawn chairs. Still the GOAT. Bro, the way he was just standing there. They realized too late they up. Imagine thinking you can take Prime Mike just because he's older now. The hands don't retire. Hashtag started trending. Hashtag Iron Mike. Hashtag still the baddest. Hashtag pray for Scarface, that one made Tyson chuckle. Sports analysts got a hold of the story next. They ran the clip, breaking it down like it was a championship fight. Slow motion replays. Expert commentary. A dozen ex-boxers chiming in. Look at the placement of that body shot, precision, technique, devastation. Even at half speed, Mike's reaction time is unreal. These guys never had a chance. If he trained for 6 months, he could probably still knock out half the current heavyweight division. The comments kept rolling in. Some people laughed. Some people shook their heads at the stupidity of the attackers. But one thing was clear. Mike Tyson wasn't just a name. He was a warning. The calls start coming. By late afternoon, Tyson's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. He ignored most of them. Reporters, old friends, promoters, everybody wanted a quote, a reaction, an interview. He didn't care. But then, there was one call he couldn't ignore. Mike. The voice on the other end was familiar. Rough, heavy. Someone who had been there since the beginning. "Hey, Don," Tyson sighed. Don Turner. His old trainer. One of the few men in the world who still spoke to him without hesitation, without caution. "You really had to go out and whoop some kids?" Don asked, his voice half amused, half exasperated. "They weren't kids," Tyson muttered. Don chuckled. "Well, they damn sure learned a lesson, huh?" Tyson didn't answer. He just rubbed his temples. "Mike," Don continued, "I gotta ask, how'd it feel?" Tyson was quiet for a long moment. "Like breathing," he finally said. Don didn't respond right away. He didn't have to. They both knew what that meant. Fighting was in Tyson's blood. It always had been. Even after all these years, even after he had tried to leave that world behind, it was still there. Waiting. The offers. By evening, the fight world had gotten a hold of the story. And that's when the offers started coming in. Promoters smelled money. Big money. People started whispering about an exhibition match. Maybe even something bigger. Tyson versus one of these new heavyweights. Could Iron Mike still fight professionally? Does the legend have one more in him? The numbers were ridiculous. Millions. Tens of millions. For just one fight. And for the first time in years. Tyson actually thought about it. The reflection. That night, Tyson sat alone in his apartment, staring out the window. The city stretched before him, lights flickering like stars. He sipped his tea, rolling the cup between his hands. His body felt good. Not sore, not tired. There was something almost electric inside him. A hum. A pulse. Like an engine that had been left off for years but still ran perfectly when you turned the key. He remembered the way those men had looked at him. The fear. The respect. The way they had understood, too late, that they had stepped into a world they didn't belong in. And he wondered. Did he miss it? He had spent years walking away from the fight. From the ring. From the man he used to be. But the truth was. That man was still inside him. And now, the whole world knew it, too. The question. His phone buzzed again. A text this time. From an old rival. A simple message. "One more, Mike." Tyson stared at the screen. Then, slowly, almost unconsciously, he smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, the fight wasn't over yet. A week later, Tyson sat in a quiet cafe, sipping his tea. The news cycle had already moved on, but people still whispered when they saw him. Some approached with wide eyes, others just nodded respectfully. Then, someone unexpected walked in. The young leader from that first night. His lip was healed, but the bruise on his cheek still lingered. He hesitated at the entrance, shifting awkwardly before finally stepping forward. Mr. Tyson?" Tyson raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The kid swallowed hard. I just wanted to say, my bad." Tyson leaned back, studying him. The boy looked nervous, but there was something else in his expression, understanding. "I ain't know who you was, man. I ain't know a lot of things." Tyson nodded slowly. "You learned something?" The boy exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah. Yeah, I did. Tyson gestured to the empty seat across from him. Then sit down. Let's talk. The boy blinked. Then, cautiously, he sat. And so, for the first time in a long time, Mike Tyson didn't have to teach with his fists. This time, he used his words. Because true strength wasn't in throwing punches. It was in knowing when you didn't have to.